Hello.
Hello, Mr. Hansen, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. All right. And am I able to share my screen?
Yes, you should be.
Okay.
If not, we'll fix that for you, but.
All right. Okay. Well, afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present this year. And I think the timing is very opportune. And I'll provide an overview from 2021. And as we're all familiar, it was a very challenging year. And I think it's very timely to look at it in review as we go into this bear season. So I'll start with some quick facts from last year. They're troubling, but they also show us the way ahead. So there were 70 plus incidents involving property damage last year. There were 4 bluff charges last year, and in 2 occasions, bear spray was deployed. There was 3 home invasions, and 13 bears were ultimately destroyed last year. And actually, things have started where they left off already this spring, and there is a trap out already. In terms of last year, it was an intense year, a particularly intense year, but actually it was the 3rd of 3 troubling years. In 2019, there were 13 bears destroyed. In 2020, 2 were destroyed due to conflicts, but 10 died in vehicle accidents. And then last year, 13 bears destroyed. So 38 bears in 3 years. There were over 45 structures damaged last year. And this is a bit of a photo montage of some of those incidents. Last year, chickens were a real target for bears, and at 12 locations, bears were able to entered into coops, and over 50 chickens were lost. Last year, another unusual twist, was break-in in vehicles. So 4 vehicle break-ins, and interestingly, there have been 5 already this spring, vehicle break-ins. Embedded in all of that troubling overview, there was good news. And I'd just like to highlight how much teamwork there was last year that came together to provide a coordinated response, and progress was made on many fronts last year. And some of the highlights was beginning work on a very essential tool for our toolkit, and that's a wildlife attractant management bylaw initiative. Working together with the ACRD and providing input for the rollout of curbside pickup this fall. The commitment from Ozark Environmental to increase the number of bear-resistant commercial bins deployed on the West Coast. And many businesses and residents made significant investments in long-term solutions. And as I mentioned, the working relationships for operational response was really strengthened between Bylaw, the CO service, Pacific Rim National Park Reserve, First Nations, and provincial parks. I won't go over these numbers, but they're there for, and they show the multifaceted character of the WildSafeBC program. Here's some examples of long-term investments. Some of the good news last year is replacing non-bear resistant infrastructure with bear resistant. And the previous slide showed business examples, and many residents also invested in bear resistant infrastructure, like in this case here. I believe about 20 of these were installed by residents. And so the significance can be significant on the front end, but they are long-term solutions. Many people discovered the effectiveness of electric fencing, and there were quite a few installations. We've now installed 26 fences in the last 3 years, and people are coming to realize how versatile electric fencing can be in preventing problems. Lots of public engagement and a lot of youth engagement. So we gave sessions in 15 classes for WildSafe Rangers, and also participated for a third season in the new Chalmers Warrior Youth Program. And also there's public events like BC Goes Wild with 300 plus people engaged. And also reached out to residents as best we could with COVID restrictions, and left packages in hotspot neighborhoods at over 400 residents. And this year, going into 2022, we have very good news in that I'm joined by Marianne Paquette, who's also on this Zoom. And we are working together. So we now have a team of 2, which gives us even greater capacity and more coverage that we can provide support to the area. So part 3, the way forward in terms of breaking the cycle, this troubling cycle. There were a lot of lessons learned in 2021 to inform the way ahead. And it was down to the bears that showed us in detail the issues that need addressing. And so some of those have already been mentioned. Bylaws are a big one, and other regulatory and policy tools. Seeking Bear Smart status. Interestingly, we are very close to meeting all of the requirements to be a Bear Smart community, and ongoing support for the WildSafeBC program in the years to come. District of Tofino has a very good guiding document that's very detailed roadmap for how to break the cycle, and that's the Human-Wildlife Conflict Management Plan. And there is very good direction in the updated OCP. There's potential for considering zoning conditions as we move ahead. Development conditions such as requiring waste management plans when developments are built out, and business license conditions. All of those are various tools available. In terms of the Bear Smart status, you can see we have check marks on all of the requirements, and the implementation of Bear Smart bylaws would be the last check mark. And we would actually join a very small number of communities in BC that meet all the requirements. So the WildSafeBC program, I'm very happy to say this is year 5, and each year the capacity and the reach has continued to grow, and the partnerships, the number of partnerships and the scope of collaboration grows year to year to year. And there's some urgency to continue all of this work. 2021, the incidents were up over 700%. So where we're going to be in 5 or 10 years is really requires keeping our head down and continuing to build momentum and try to get past the tipping point and breaking this cycle. So because we cannot control the weather, such as the heat dome and berry crops and lack of salmon returns, but we can influence infrastructure, best practices, engagement, awareness, visitor experience, behaviors, compliance, and stewardship. There's been significant progress on all of those fronts. So it isn't encouraging in many respects. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hansen. Thanks for your report and for all of the hard work you do. I do understand that there was a funding request that has been referred to staff through the granting process. So I'll just move to council to see if there's any comments or questions. Councillor Thick.
Thank you for that good report, Bob. I really appreciate it. And I'm just, I'm troubled like you, I guess, to see those numbers. And yet we have greater, as you said, greater collaboration. More money is being put at the programs. Now we're going to have 2 coordinators. What is there one thing that you mentioned a number of things, but what do you attribute this increase in interactions to, when we seem to be more aware, more educated, more people, more money, yet we can't seem to lick this problem yet. So
Yeah.
Comments?
Yeah, I can go back to my experience in national parks, where I was in Jasper when they, at that point in time, were in sort of a similar part of the journey that we're on. And it really took concerted effort and a lot of investment in infrastructure and bringing in the regulatory pieces and the bylaws and doing compliance as well as education work. Took about 5 years to really start to turn the whole situation. So it just speaks to how complex the challenges are. And the things like the heat dome last year, and then the lack of chum returns last year, those are all complications that will, play out like they did last year. It started off with really good berry crops last year. Things were looking good. We didn't have bear issues, and then we had the heat dome, and within a week, the incidents started to increase. But what it showed is that an awful lot of people are storing garbage in their backyards. It really surprised me to what extent people still store garbage outside in their backyards. So highlighted that issue in a very dramatic fashion. So that's something we can work on. And if we can reduce that, we're working with a lot of businesses and as part of the Business Pledge Initiative. And that is businesses taking big steps and making significant investments in infrastructure and staff training. So we're booked right up with staff training this already this year. So it's just keeping doing what we're doing, hopefully passing the bylaws, and it's just a matter of continuous work. There's no silver bullets, unfortunately. It takes all of those pieces to really make the change, and it takes years of work. So we just have to keep at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that, because as you say, we're at year 5 now, but we're not seeing the downturn. We're still seeing we're on the upslope. So, and when you're talking about infrastructure, you're referring particularly to the bear safe garbage bins, are you?
So the common commercial bins that we see everywhere have the lift bars, and the change that's happening with Ozark Environmental is they're fabricating more commercial bins with the self-latching lids, and those are bear resistant. The lift bar bins are only bear resistant if the lift bar is up and there's a carabiner through it. And unfortunately, you can go around to any of our communities today, and the vast majority of those lift bar bins will have the bars down and they're not secure. So the bears keyed in on that last year, and the best solution is to replace all those with the new design. and Ozark is quite committed to doing that. And in the interim, that's where waste management bylaws would come into play. Is we can speak with people time and time and time again, and still go back and not see a commercial bin latched, even in cases where a bear's been in their bin, the week before. So that's where we need the extra tool to ensure the situation is actually resolved and doesn't carry on being a chronic problem.
Thank you. No accounting for those bears getting smarter, are there?
No.
They are smart.
Sorry, and moving on to Councillor Steer, have a question?
Yeah, I think you reiterated most of the points that I was looking at. You pointed out very clearly the ways forward and the work that, as we know, is multi-layered. There is no silver bullet, as you've clearly laid out, and that it does take time. And you've used the Jasper example, and there are many others. I think of Campmore as another one that particularly of interest. But the one area that you didn't that wasn't addressed maybe in Kathy's. I just had a quick question about in the way forward, there was zoning conditions. I'm wondering if you could elaborate on what that might look like or what that means. I was unsure of what that meant.
In the conflict management plan that was that I had the slide on, that the district was submitted to the district. There are recommendations in that conflict management plan for zoning conditions. So there is some direction there. It's basically, as the updated OCP states, need for consideration of when it comes to new developments or new types of uses, to consider wildlife movement corridors and wildlife habitat. There are certain areas of the community that are particularly active in terms of wildlife movements and just providing wildlife habitat. And if development is undertaken in those particular hotspot areas, then you can anticipate that will become a new interface where there's a high potential conflict. So I don't have any specific wordings, but there is more specific language in that conflict management plan.
And just a follow-up comment, thank you, Bob. You had mentioned about this year, particularly the chickens being an issue, and as a chicken owner and the work we've done together on that. I just wanted to point out that those incidences where the coops were infiltrated, those did not have electric fencing. Those, all of us that I know that do, did not have issues with bears on our coops. So it's one of those layers that you talk about that is incredibly effective. And I noted that you have 12 more in the queue for being set up. So those are some of the positive notes, and that education process has been incredible. So thank you for all that work on that, and I'll leave it there.
Okay.
Any more comments or questions? Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, Bob, my question was about the graph that you showed of the different incidents reported to costs and warp. Is that, it just says in Pacific Rim. So is that you Tla-o-qui-aht Tofino and the park, or?
It does not include the park. It's Clayoquot Sound. There are a couple of reports in there from a Pitsit and a Howsett, but primarily from Tofino down to Tla-o-qui-aht, and I believe there may also be some Area C reports in there as well, which is in the area that Marianne was coordinator for the last 2 years, for the Tatsu-Makoa WildSafeBC program. So yeah, so basically from Tokort around up to Tofino.
Is the incidence pretty balanced between Euclid and Tofino, or does one community have more of a problem to address?
Actually, last year it was very balanced. I think it was like 160 some for each community. So very like similar numbers, but at sort of the height of things last year, there was anywhere from 3 up to 5 bears active in Euclid, and at the same time, 3 to 5 bears active in Tofino. And then there was bears active in Millstream and Willowbrae and at the junction and Tla-o-qui-aht and Essa-Wista. So the the park research bear population study that they just wrapped up, they identified or have a very confident estimate of a population of 100 bears between Tofino and Euclid and Kennedy Lake. And in terms of, you know, the challenges not lessening, we have an incredibly high density of bears in this region. And when something affects their food sources on the larger landscape, and they can find abundant unsecured food sources in the communities, then that's what happened last year is what we see and can expect in the future. And also all of our communities, every community is growing outward into that landscape as well. So it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time, but really the alternative is really not an alternative. have to keep working on it for sure.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you very much, Bob.
Okay, thank you.
There you go. So we'll move on to correspondence, and we have one item, a letter from the Village of Cumberland regarding requesting letter of support for Bill C-216. And I'll just mention that this is on the agenda as there was a request from the Honorable Gord Johns, our MP for Courtenay Alberni, for our council to review the letter and to provide support for it. So are there any questions or comments about the letter? Oh, would anybody like to move the recommendation?
I'll move the recommendation that on behalf of Council, the Mayor be directed to express support for Bill C-216 to Prime Minister Trudeau and to the Minister of Health and Addictions to support the efforts to secure federal aid on decriminalization, safe supply and access to recovery, treatment and harm reduction services.
Do you have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Fick. Is there any further comments or any comments? Okay, all in favor? Okay, motion passed. So we do have a presentation from Mr. Baker for a permission to proceed for an animal attraction bylaw. I believe he is online.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Chair, thank you very much for your chance to speak this evening with the potential for a wildlife attractant bylaw. I'm just going to take a quick moment to share my screen. Okay, there we go. Wildlife attractant bylaw should be on the screen there now. Hopefully somebody can give me a thumbs up. I can't really see very far. We're seeing that? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I am going to keep this brief. I think we've just had a good presentation from Mr. Hansen, and this sort of goes hand in hand with that. So wildlife attractant bylaw. So just a little bit of background. The District of Tofino Human Wildlife Conflict Management Plan was prepared by Kristen McMillan of BearSmart BC Consulting and presented to Council back on May 6th of 2019 at the Committee of the Whole. The resolution from that meeting was that the Tofino Wildlife Hazard Assessment and Human Wildlife Conflict Management Plan be referred to staff for a report back on work plan implications. So since that time, Staff have participated in working groups with Parks Canada, BC Conservation Officers, of course, WildSafeBC, representatives from each of the communities across the West Coast in order to identify the key issues, concerns, and challenges of how to work cooperatively on the coast to resolve these issues. Our objectives with the wildlife attractant bylaw would be to clearly define what wildlife attractants are and how we can manage those attractants within our community. Adopting the bylaw in conjunction with the education and enforcement, the District of Tofino can create enough awareness for managing attractants properly and decrease the number of human-wildlife interactions on the coast. Based on the strong recommendations from WildSafeBC, as well as the Tofino Human-Wildlife Conflict Management Plan, and examples from what other communities are currently doing, the bylaw will also outline appropriate treatment of refuse, outline acceptable refuse containers and enclosures for both household and commercial, set the parameters for curb placement and removal of containers, outline requirements for managing other non-refuse related attractants, and provide clear enforcement tools that are not currently covered under the District of Tofino's Garbage and Recyclable Materials Collection Bylaw. I lost my presentation, but the last slide was the recommendations that staff be directed to proceed with the development of the District of Tofino Wildlife Attractant Bylaw for presentation to Council in the spring of 2022.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions? Councilor McMaster.
Is this bylaw going to take into account these new garbage containers we're getting from the RDN later this year?
Yes, that is the plan. We've had meetings with WildSafeBC as recent as last week and gone through all of what we've outlined in the bylaw so far. And it looks as though the new garbage containers, we're expecting to see them, I believe, as early as November. So the goal would be to have those written into the bylaw so that as soon as they are available, we can have that be the requirements 100%.
That's great. I'd hate to see us get new garbage containers and then you suddenly turn around and say, no, we want something different.
Councilor Steer.
Yes. Thank you, Chief Baker. Just one question around one of the areas that I think might be a challenge, and I don't know, is on the non-refuse related attractants, such as I think of fruit trees and gardens and what have you. Do you have any information that you wanted to share right now about how that might be addressed? I know that it'll probably be coming up in the attractant bylaw, but I'm just curious myself as how that might be looked at, because I know it can be a serious issue.
Absolutely. So again, most of these recommendations that we've put into the draft of the bylaw, they do come directly from the report that was written by Crystal McMillan, and again discussed through with Bob as well too, Bob Hansen. So for instance, just with the fruit trees one, I do have a draft right in front of me that says any owner of an occupier of real property must ensure that any fruit or nuts from a tree, bush or shrub on a parcel is maintained and stored in such a manner not to attract wildlife. And so we do have some guidelines around that. And again, it's going to take some time. It's going to take education. And just the way we're doing with garbage cans right now, we have a weekly audit on garbage cans, and most people may not realize it, but every street, every household has been monitored since the beginning of April. And we have statistics and data on every single person that has left their garbage cans out beyond the end of the day and into the next day. And we have photographs and things like that. So we use similar types of methods to collect information so we can follow up with education and, if needed, enforcement on things like fruit trees and those sorts of things as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just had a couple questions that relate to what you just have explained to us, and in light of the presentation we just heard. I just wonder, will this bylaw have any, will the frequency of the garbage or the refuse pickup be changing as we have been led to understand from previous presentations? And If so, what would the frequency be and how would this affect this bylaw, or does it affect the bylaw? That's one question I had. Second one.
That's a good question. I have not personally been made aware of any changes to the frequency. The way the bylaw is written is it's very specific about the time at which you can place your garbage out to the curb and the time that it must be retrieved on the day of garbage collection. So should the dates change or the frequency increase, those times would still apply and are very specific. So it shouldn't need to be updated based on any of those potential changes.
So we don't know if we're going to we're sticking with weekly garbage pickup, or are we going to bi-weekly garbage pickup for residential? Do we know the answer to that yet? No?
I do not know that.
Okay. No, I just think that is a concern in light of what was just, spoken to us about the amount of garbage and the way we're handling that. And the second thing is the visitor expectations and compliance. Will this have anything, will anything in this bylaw, do you think will it speak to that at all? Or will there be any way that we can incorporate visitor expectations or compliance into the bylaw?
I think much of that would come down to compliance with regards to where they're staying. And so we have the same tools at, let's say, a vacation rental, for instance, or even a commercial hotel property, the same tools as far as enforcement on when the garbage is put out, how it's put out, those sorts of things. So it definitely comes into effect there. We do also have information in here or sections on feeding wildlife, which is a big one as well too. And perhaps Bob may have been a better person to speak to, how many occurrences we have where individuals are feeding the wildlife, but we have tried to take that into consideration as well.
Thank you.
I could just a quick response. So the garbage and recycling pickup is an ACRD. It's on Contract OZR, and on the district website, there's an ACRD section, and that information that you're asking about is on that site there. So if it's not specific in there, and I'm looking to Ms. Bass, but I believe it is. If not, it will link you to the ACRD site that will give you that information, which we'll be rolling out. So we'll be doing organics, for example, coming into the fall. So that's all laid out in that information.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions? Chief Baker, can I ask you to put the recommendation back on the screen just as we don't have it in here, just for the wording? I'll ask anybody.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, don't be. Just one moment.
Would anybody like to move the recommendation? Sure, Councillor Challengers.
I'll move that staff be directed to proceed with development of the District of Tofino Wildlife Attractant Bylaw for presentation to council in spring 2022.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor McMaster. Any further discussion? All in favor? Okay, motion carried. Thank you very much, Chief Baker.
Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
And I believe that we do not have a report at this time for the community naming policy updates. We do have Ms. Best and I believe Aaron available, Mr. Rogers, sorry, for questions if council has any questions for them. Oh, would anybody like to move the first recommendation?
Go ahead.
Councillor McMaster.
Move that the report titled Community Naming Policy Updates on the May 16, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting be received for information and discussion.
Do you have a seconder? Councillor Challenger. Any further discussion? All in favor? Okay, motion carried.
Move that the naming of streets, lanes and parks policy adopted in 1998 and last amended in 2016 be repealed, and that staff be directed to provide future naming suggestions for streets, lanes and parks based on non-human conventions on an ad hoc basis until the new policy is introduced and adopted by council.
Seconder, Councillor Anderson. And we have a comment.
I just have a question. I did have a quick question. I was just wondering if there is there a lot in the queue right now in terms of naming for parks, streets, lanes at this point in time?
I would have to refer to Mr. Rogers. I was working on the policy end of this procedure.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Steer. We don't have anything currently, I think, in the queue right now. You know, there may be some names that we may want to take a closer look at and be a little bit proactive. This is one of those ones that comes up every 10 years when we do a new subdivision, and then we go, oh darn, we should have changed that 10 years ago. So I don't think there's anything pressing or anything immediate, but you know, I can see stuff on the horizon in the next 1 to 2 years.
Thank you. Councillor Lester.
Can we name streets after aliens then if it's non-human?
Star Trek characters?
Only if you can bring them.
You don't need to answer that. Are there any other questions for Mr. Rogers? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, motion carried. And that brings us to question period. Do we have anybody watching yet?
Thank you, Chair Chalmers. Unfortunately, we do not have any other attendees. We do have a previous delegation that's still at the meeting, but I don't believe they requested to submit any comments. So,
Okay, would anybody like to move the recommendation into closed? I can do it. I'll move that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to section 90 of the Community Charter to discuss matters relating to 1A, personal information about an individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent. 1C, employee relations. 1K, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service. They're at their preliminary stages and that, in the view of council, could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they were held in public. And 2B, the consideration of information received and held in confidence relating to negotiations between the municipality, a provincial government, or the federal government, or both, or between a provincial government or the federal government, or both, and a third party.
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Anderson. All in favor?